The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Talking to teenagers can be tricky, especially when the topics aren't necessarily your own strong suits. Tonight, some help from experts on how to talk to young people about cannabis, online hate and exploitation, and why it might be a leaner holiday season than they'd hoped for. It's Tuesday, December 13th, and that's all ahead on the agenda. Pot is, of course, legal now. Indeed, there are cannabis stores everywhere, it seems, selling not just things to smoke, but also to eat and drink as well. With it, more accessible than ever, including with parents partaking. Talking to young people about such substances may belong on every parent's to-do list. With us to help with that, let's welcome in Hamilton, Ontario, Dr. Christina Grant, Professor of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine Specialist at McMaster University. She's also co-chair of the Recreational Cannabis Task Force at the Canadian Pediatric Society. And here in our studio, there's Steve Keller, bilingual curriculum developer of the Youth Cannabis Awareness Program at the YMCA of Greater Toronto. And it's good to have both of you on our program here tonight. Steve, to you first, the appropriate age to talk to young people about cannabis is what?
It's an excellent question. First of all, we know that sometimes you'll have parents or adults that'll say they would rather have the conversation when an individual is of legal age, which is 19 here in Ontario, 18 Alberta, 21 Quebec.
That's
and
way
19.
too late, I presume.
And I would agree. We know that the average age of onset use is around age 14 for cannabis, which is fairly close to the average age of alcohol being about 13 and a half, according to the Canadian Student Tobacco, Alcohol and Drug Survey. So our program generally recommends to start those conversations around age 12 or 13 to really set up sort of preventive methods, right? Instead of reacting and saying we want to wait till someone's 19, there's always that risk that either they've been using for a few years, or maybe they know someone who's been using, and they could have experienced possible risks. So it's better to be preventive.
Christina, I presume parents have to walk this kind of tightrope of, I want to raise this, but I don't want to raise it too early, because if I raise it too early, I might actually encourage them to experiment when they otherwise might not have. So how do they work all that out?
It's a great question. And I would say that there's always this myth that for us as parents and professionals, raising issues among youth will somehow cause them to start trying, in this instance, cannabis. And there just isn't any evidence for that. Instead, I would agree with Steve that we want to get ahead of the ball. We want to have conversations with our young people and our kids in a developmentally appropriate way. We know in middle school, and sometimes even in the late, grade 6, that kids are talking about alcohol, they're talking about cannabis, and some of them are trying it. So it's around. So I think it's a myth to think that they don't know about it. It's also a myth to think that by us raising it as parents that we're somehow instigating them trying it. Rather, I think it's important for your kids to know that you're aware of these things and you really want to be a resource for them, and that you're not going to bring judgment, but rather openness and caring.
Let me pick up on that. Steve, how important is it to the successful conversation for parents to sort of put aside whatever personal biases they may have about this to engage with their kids?
I would say setting aside bias is very important, and that works both ways. If you have a parent who maybe uses cannabis or is a little more permissive to cannabis, if they allow that to sort of show up in the conversation they're having with youth, that may come across that they're permissive to the youth using. On the other hand, if you have a parent who is very anti-cannabis, very against the topic, maybe they were raised in a little bit more of an abstinence-only sort of a basis, and they've really held on to that, if they only point out the negatives and they only point out the worst-case scenarios, it can come across as fear-mongering to youth or lecturing, especially if they hear these worst-case scenarios and they maybe don't see them happen. So, for instance, if a parent says, well, everyone that uses cannabis will eventually, go crazy. There's that old reefer madness discussion from the 40s and 50s that sometimes still permeates. And if a youth hears that, but they see friends using and they're not seeing that happen, it all of a sudden can break down that conversation. So it becomes very important to remain as sort of unbiased as you can, even if you do have those personal feelings, to understand that you're just trying to share information. You want to present risks, but there's a difference between saying that there is a possibility that cannabis can cause psychological disorders, that it can affect or lead to possible issues with psychosis or schizophrenia, particularly for those that may have a family history, versus saying that everyone who uses will go through this.
Gotcha. Well, Reefer Madness, for those who don't know or remember, it was a movie, I guess, in the 50s, which really showed everybody completely losing it after they had a toke of a joint. Having said that, Christina, come on in here and tell us, what does using cannabis do to a teenager's brain? What does it actually do?
So there's a couple things that are really important. And one is that the cannabis of today is different than what that was used in the 40s and 60s, right? So the THC content and the percent of THC is 2 to 4 times higher today than 40, 50 years ago. And that's relevant when we talk about the effect on the teenage brain. So over the last couple decades, we've learned more and more about how the teenage brain continues to develop until kind of mid-20s. And that's why we would suggest, if at all possible, to try and delay using or experimenting with cannabis till people are into their 20s. Again, knowing that that's not going to be the case for everybody. What happens is the front part of the brain, or the cortex, the frontal cortex, is that seat of reason. And that's the last part of the brain that actually develops in teenagers. That's the thinking, the planning, understanding risks and benefits of decisions we make. And because there's such rapid development happening, that's the area that's most vulnerable to cannabis and is affected by it.
Well, if this is the potential that teenagers are looking at if they start using cannabis, 14, 15, 16, and as a parent, you presumably don't want your child doing that, can you preach abstinence, Steve, with any satisfaction?
I think there's a difference between preaching abstinence only and understanding abstinence is one sort of method of reducing risk. In the past, when you saw programs that promoted abstinence only, we found that didn't necessarily work, because the issue is, as soon as a youth maybe chooses to use, that message that surrounds abstinence only tends to kind of fall apart. They lose sort of the other parts of the discussion. We understand, and we do certainly promote the importance, just like you were saying, of waiting until age 25, and that is something I could not agree with more. But we do know that some youth will use. Statistically, we know that the rates of use amongst teenagers can range between about 17% to 21%.
Hang on, I got the stats right here.
Oh, fantastic.
You want it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here we go. Okay, Sheldon, let's bring this graphic up here. Because we're calling this teens under the influence. This is the percentage of students in grades 7 to 12 reporting cannabis use. 22% reported trying cannabis in their lifetime. 17% said they used cannabis at least once in the past year. 11% reported using at least once in the past month. About 2% of students said they use cannabis daily. 2% using daily. These findings from the 2021 Ontario Student Drug Use and Health Survey. They surveyed more than 2,000 students, grades 7 to 12, across the province. That's who participated. Okay, I'm going to be a smart aleck here.
Sure.
22% admitted to using cannabis at least once,
Yep.
which means 78% are lying about the fact that they didn't try it.
And
Fair?
that's an excellent point to bring up. It's one that we like to bring up with youth as well. There's a common misconception among youth, and sometimes among parents. They believe, everyone's doing it. They say since legalization, everyone's doing it. The research doesn't back that up. It really shows that the majority of youth actually don't use cannabis.
How reliable is that research?
We've seen that in research from the CTADS in 2017 and 2015. We saw it in the Canadian Alcohol and Drug Survey after legalization in 2019. We saw it in the Student Tobacco, Alcohol and Drug Survey. In fact, any national reporting data, and even the provincial reporting data, never actually shows that teenage use or adolescent use, below age 19, ever surpasses the 50% mark. And that's great news to know, especially when you're having that dialogue with youth, to point out that If a youth believes everyone is using it, they may be more likely to try it because they'll base their decision on someone else's experience. And the risk there is that cannabis can have such a different effect on people for a whole wide array of reasons. It could be their medical history. It could be if they have history, like I said, of psychological conditions in their family tree. It could be their body composition. Again, it could be their age with the brain still developing. And if they understand that the majority of people actually don't use cannabis, they can hopefully really frame that decision based on their own beliefs, based on the things they've learned themselves.
Okay, but Christina, I'll acknowledge here, I don't have any longitudinal or latitudinal studies here to look at. I have my kids' experiences and what they told me that I'm looking at right now. And they told me it's absolutely everywhere. And the notion that 22% of kids are trying it and 78% aren't doesn't jibe with my anecdotal evidence. So tell me I'm wrong.
I think you're wrong. There's no doubt. So what Steve's talking about is it's another myth. So the myth that everybody's using, and there's a lot of areas in adolescent medicine where that's the case. The other myth is for 15 and 16-year-olds that they're all having sex, and the research doesn't back that up. So I think you're wrong. And
I'm glad to hear it, frankly.
I agree with Steve. The research that you quoted, those numbers, is from a huge database. They've been doing that Canadian student drug survey, drug and alcohol drug survey. They've been doing that work for decades, and it's really excellent work through CAMH, and probably the best data that we have right now.
Okay, since, Steve, a chunk of kids, admittedly not the majority, according to these highly reputable studies that I'm hearing you two talk about, since a chunk of kids is going to try cannabis, how do you get them to do it responsibly?
It becomes very important to understand that any cannabis use can carry risk. And it's important to point out that if they use, it doesn't immediately make them irresponsible for doing so. It's a choice that they make. So we have to make sure that they understand if they do choose to use, they're understanding what those reduced harms may look like or reducing risks may look like. That could be things like designating a sober driver if you choose to travel. And that becomes a conversation you can have with kids at any point in their life. It's as simple as just asking if they're going out, how are you getting home later? And if they say, well, I've got a friend's parent driving me, I've got this friend driving me, it becomes really helpful for the parent to be willing to help and say, well, do you need a ride if worse comes to worse? If this doesn't work out, do you have a backup plan? Another thing to consider is looking for those lower potency products. As was mentioned earlier, not only is the potency of dried leaf cannabis much higher than it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but the advent of the 2.0 market, when we look at things like cannabis extracts, which is a product whereby the THC has actually been pulled off of the plant, the unwanted portions discarded, and you're left with a stronger product. The potency in that can be anywhere from 80 to 85% at maximum. And then even if we look at vape cartridges or e-liquids with THC, we can see the potencies into the 90s. So one of the things to point out is looking for those lower potency products and avoiding those really high potencies, especially for new users.
Christina, is it ever a good idea for a parent to say to their kid, look, I know you're sort of experimenting with this, and I don't want to be I don't want to be an oppressive, ridiculous parent about this, but you know you're screwing up your brain. It's going to affect your marks and your future, the possibility of your getting into university or college, all of that stuff. Is that a card worth playing?
No, those types of statements, I really don't land anywhere helpful. So what I would say as a parent is you really want to be positive. Be positive and support your youth, and scaring them and fear mongering, like Steve mentioned, we know that doesn't work when it comes to substances. If you're worried about your young person, they seem to be using on a regular basis, you want to choose your time wisely. When you're relaxed, when you're calm, you're not overly angry about anything that they've done, and really sit down and express that you care about them and you've noticed that they've been using more than they previously did, and you care about them, and is there anything that you can do as a parent to support them? The other important piece I would say, Steve, is that teenagers have a high hypocrisy radar. So if you come home from a tough day and have a scotch and put your feet up, you need to be prepared that your teen's going to call you on it. They're going to say, yeah, but what are you talking about? Like you unwind with a drink at night. So it's also an opportunity to reflect on our own habits. But the coming to them and expressing care, you can never really go wrong with that. And listening is underrated, right? That's probably the most important. Those would be the most important tips.
That's a great point about the alcohol, and let me follow up with Steve on that, because if a teen comes to their parent and says, look, this isn't alcohol, it's not a hard drug, it's not heroin, it's not cocaine, it's plant-based, so it's therefore not that harmful. What's the response to that?
One of the workshops that our program actually offers is sort of a trivia-based presentation. And one of the things that we do is we point out these statements that we hear commonly. And that's actually one of them that we say right at the beginning is youth will say, well, cannabis is a plant, and so therefore it's harmless. So we do like to point out the presence of THC in the plant itself, and we know the psychological effects that it can cause. Short-term effects can include things like decrease in blood pressure and increased heart rate, issues with fatigue, difficulty with memory. And we also know the long-term risks of THC can include things like increased risk of heart disease. But the other thing I like to point out with youth is not all natural products in the world are safe. And the examples I often point to are tobacco, which we know is another natural product, poison ivy, a giant hogweed, these things that we see in nature all the time. They grow naturally, but they do still carry risk. So, and I did want to mention, going back to something that Christina mentioned a moment ago, that if youth point out, well, you're using, you know, how is it fair for you to have a discussion with me if you're also using? Whenever I get an adult that asks me that question, I often like to point out to them, what harm reduction strategies or what strategies do you have in place to reduce risk? So if, say, youth points out, well, you're using. Well, true, but I'm at home. If I need to go anywhere, I can call a cab, I can designate a driver.
It's legal for an adult to do it. It's not for a teenager.
There's the legal ramifications to look at, certainly.
Brain is more developed.
Precisely. They've used at an older age. And they're also pointing out the fact that when's an appropriate time to use? If they come home on a Friday night, they know they have the weekend off, they use a substance, they've chosen a safe space, they're around people they trust, they know they have a safe ride. They can actually exemplify all of those strategies that you want youth to understand.
Okay.
Because when's a better time to use, or a more appropriate time to use would be when you know you have time off and you know you're in a safe space, or 5 minutes before you have to go write an exam.
Understood. Okay, Sheldon, bottom of page 3 here. Let's get this graphic up in our last few minutes here and finish up on this. Understanding the Cannabis Control Act and other protective measures. Here we go. 19, as we just indicated, is the minimum legal age to access and use cannabis. There's up to a $200 penalty for youth under 19 possessing, consuming, or cultivating cannabis. Smoking or vaping cannabis is prohibited on or within 20 meters of areas where children commonly gather. We're talking schools, daycare centers, parks, etc. And retailers caught selling or distributing cannabis to minors could receive a $500,000 fine and or up to a year of imprisonment. So it's serious business we're talking about here. And Christina, let's follow up with this. In Ontario, we're seeing an increase in cannabis-related hospitalizations among youth. They're showing up, youth are, in ERs with cannabis-induced psychosis, severe vomiting, addiction. What do we do about that?
So there's actually two groups. There's the youth, and there's a nice study that was published from Quebec this summer that showed especially males less than 15 had much higher rates of showing up in emergency room secondary to cannabis. And one of the pieces that we haven't talked today is the myths around edibles being safer. Strictly speaking, they probably are, because you aren't inhaling the smoke, right? And the toxins with that. But what's happened is there's this concept called edible naive. And so because of all the edibles on the market these days, teens have more access to them. And what happens is you take an edible and it doesn't work the same way as smoking or using a bong. It takes, 30, 45 minutes to an hour before you start feeling the effects. So what happens is they use more and more and more, waiting to feel high. And then by the time they're high, they're actually in it sort of an overdose situation, which is why we think they're showing up in the emergency rooms.
All right, in our last minute here, Steve, I get it. Parents are often not the messengers kids want to hear from, right, when it comes to offering advice on health or anything for that matter. Who's a better messenger?
Well, you have to consider where youth are getting their information from. They're getting it from their peers. They are getting it from their parents. They're getting it from teachers. They're getting it from media. So I think what becomes really important is to really try to promote awareness to the community as a whole, so that no matter where youth are getting that information from, the message is consistent. We understand the importance of waiting or certainly limiting use at least until the age of 25, but still understanding that risks still exist for adults over the age of 25 as well. And it becomes very important that if you can sort of teach communities as a whole, whether that's through group presentations, whether that's through media projects, whether that's through awareness-raising initiatives like the YCAP program, it becomes very helpful to sort of move the audience forward as a whole, so that the information that they're getting becomes more unanimous and more sort of universal, so that you don't have misconceptions being passed along from one individual moving to the next. Because again, as you mentioned, parents may not be the best messengers for some youth, and in some cases they may not be at all.
Yeah.
But their friends are, their teachers are, their peers are, and being able to sort of educate that whole community becomes all the more important.
Gotcha. Very helpful, you two. Christina Grant from McMaster University, Steve Keller from the YMCA's Youth Cannabis Awareness Program. It's good of both of you to join us here on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Try to tell teenagers to get off their phones or to do something that's not on their screen, and you'll quickly find out how attached to the online world they can be. And while that can have its upside, it also means they're exposed to some pretty awful content. With us now on how to talk to teens about things such as racism and pornography that they will inevitably encounter online, we welcome, in the nation's capital, Purnima Sundar, Executive Director at the Knowledge Institute on Child and Youth Mental Health and Addictions. And in Amherstburg in southwestern Ontario, Cara Brisson-Boyven, Director of Research at the digital and media literacy nonprofit organization called Media Smarts. And we welcome both of you to our program today, and I guess we should start here. Cara, I want to share your numbers with our audience. These are from Media Smart, their latest report. So Sheldon, if we can, let's bring these graphics up here and tell you what kids think about this stuff. Violent, racist, sexist online content. 47% of Canadians aged 12 to 17 report seeing racist or sexist content online at least once a week. LGBTQ plus youth and young people with a disability are more likely to see it. 88% of youth agree it's important to speak up about harmful content, but 58% feel they don't know what to say. This data, incidentally, collected during the COVID pandemic as part of Media Smart's fourth phase of the Young Canadians in a Wireless World study. Okay, Cara, get us started here. In which online spaces are young people running into this content most frequently?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to recognize, as you highlighted, this study is part of Media Smart's longest running, most comprehensive study that examines young people's lives online. And in part of that work, in this phase, we discovered that the primary motivation for young people being online is social connection. So not surprisingly, they're mostly engaging in social spaces, social networks. The top 5 platforms they indicated were YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter.
Well, that's the whole gamut there. You can't very well keep them off that, can you?
Oh, I mean, and I think it is important to recognize that because social connection is the heart of their motivation, and of course that we collected this data at the peak of the pandemic, this was where young people were living, playing, connecting, doing schoolwork. So, it's not surprising that they want to be there, and in many ways they do need to be there. It's where they are learning and growing.
Having said that, Purnima, we hear in this study that LGBTQ plus and young people with disabilities are more likely to see racist and sexist content. Why would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just increased exposure means increased potential to be exposed to a number of unsettling images, unsettling messages, and so on. And so, as Cara said, young people during the pandemic were just online a whole lot more for school, for socializing, for recreation. And I think that when you have young people that have diverse identities, they're seeking connection. So some of these safe spaces to be with other young people, give and get peer support, socialize with people with shared kind of interests and experiences. They're also looking for information on health and sexual health and mental health. And, the internet can be great places to find that kind of information and connection, but they can also, these searches also influence algorithms in a way that can drive young people to experience more unsavory content. And we know that there is significant research on how these online platforms and technology are designed to amplify some of these inequities and online harms. It's designed to get more views, more engagements, and ultimately profit those that are running these sites. And these young people are particularly vulnerable to that discrimination.
Kara, while we know that young people are quite capable of being quite miserable to each other online, I wonder how much of this is that and how much of it is adults behaving badly.
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction. And, I think, one of the things that we found both in this study and it mimics what we found in our online hate research is that often young people were flagging that they are operating in what they perceive to be adult spaces with adult created problems. And more often than not, the kinds of content, the kinds of racist and sexist, misogynist, low levels of prejudice that percolate in these spaces from their perspective are coming from the adults in these spaces. And it's important because what we found is that it tends to have the kind of consequence where young people feel less inclined to intervene because they don't necessarily feel they have a right or a voice in these spaces. So that's really problematic. And one of the things that we've been doing is really trying to work to empower youth, to reassure them that they have a right to be in these spaces. They have a voice that they absolutely ought to use. Because we did find that, one young person or one person intervening does have a ripple effect, especially for youth who hold their peer groups understandably so close and in such high regard. So yeah, it's really important, that consequence, the potential for young people to be less likely to intervene is something that I think we all need to take into consideration.
Purnima, I really am trying to get my head around what kind of adult thinks it's useful to spend their time trolling 12-year-olds with this kind of crap. Who does that?
It's a good question, Steve. I think, we are living in a time where a lot of this kind of behavior has been normalized. Unfortunately, we're living in contexts where the pandemic has had a huge impact on everybody across all age ranges. And I think that it's created some conditions that make it so that, unfortunately, adults are not behaving in ways that we would hope to be role modeling good technological behavior with young people. So it's a difficult time. It's a stressful time. And I think one of the things that we know is that the impact on young people is very detrimental. It has a really terrible impact on young people's mental health. We see poor mental health outcomes across all ages when young people experience discrimination, whether that's live and in person or online. And I think the other added piece about the online opportunity to influence young people is that this is all anonymous, and so adults who are behaving in this way or young people who are behaving in negative ways online, there's a certain level of anonymity there that protects them from any kind of negative consequence. So as Kara said, it's really important that we intervene as early as possible whenever young people are exposed to this kind of discriminatory content, to encourage them to act, encourage them to talk to their parents or caregivers, talk to teachers, talk to one another, and make sure that we sort of nip this in the bud.
Yeah, everybody's very brave when they can say whatever they want anonymously on social media. I've noticed that over the years. Kara, how about this? Your study did point out that young people do believe that they should do something, and they would like to do something when they see this kind of foul content. But perhaps you could give them some advice on what they ought to do. They're not quite sure what to do, so what should they do?
Yeah, and I think Purnima hit it on the head with, as soon as we possibly can, to provide youth with the tools to respectfully and safely engage. And that is something that Media Smarts has done. We have a resource on our website called My Voice is Louder Than Hate. It is an interactive multimedia platform designed for youth. It can be used by educators in the classroom, but also other parents and adults who are just working and want to support young people to push back and intervene. And a couple just takeaways from that. We often remind young people, and what we found from this research is that you can call in rather than call out. And by that we mean most youth prefer to take a conversation offline or into private messaging, to speak to a person in private in a way that really de-escalates the situation. Similarly, speaking to the content rather than the poster, another way to de-escalate, because of course, understandably, young people, are very cognizant of wanting to not draw unwanted attention to themselves, not want to draw themselves into situations that they don't necessarily want to be in. And then lastly, one of the things we discovered in our work was young people, want to respond in and through humor. And so part of this platform allows them to design memes. It's a creative way that they can push back, intervene, and communicate quite literally through, the kind of tools of their generation, so to speak.
Purnima, can you add to that? Does humor really disarm under these circumstances?
I want to underscore what Kara said about the calling in versus calling out. I think that's one of the ways that, helps people to feel a bit more safe when they're trying to engage in a conversation that is not necessarily publicly, embarrassing or taking somebody down in a more public way. I do think that humor is helpful. And so trying to turn it into, a less serious sort of, consequence for the individual while still making that point that this is unacceptable and that we need to pull back, I think has been shown to be quite effective. Yes.
Okay, let's do one more survey here. And Sheldon, I'm going to ask you to put up this next graphic because Media Smarts also asked Canadian young people, grades 7 to 11, about viewing pornography online. And here's what the numbers had to say about that. 42% of youth surveyed said they try to avoid seeing pornography. 22% say they have looked for it. 32% say they have seen pornography online without looking for it. The majority reported they were just 9 years old or older when they first looked for pornography online. Okay, Kara, I've got to start with this. How reliable do you think these answers are?
Well, I think first of all, we ought to take the young people who, engage in this survey, for their word. I think, young people are the experts in their own lives. However, it was a small sample of our larger population. We did ask it only to the older youth in the survey. And then, of course, it was only those who indicated that they had seen or were looking for pornography. So it's a small sample. And I think we should take that into consideration and not make any massive generalizations. But at the same time, I think we're finding some interesting trends here that are worth paying attention to. First and foremost, that I think which pushes against a lot of our sort of adults conceived stereotypes about young people is that they aren't necessarily actively seeking this out in large numbers. In fact, they're more likely to be trying to avoid stumbling upon this content unintentionally in their online engagements.
Well, let me follow up on that, because we know that when it comes to, which political party would you vote for in an election, which is not necessarily an embarrassing question, we know that there are adults who lie to pollsters about that information. Now, you're asking young people about how much porn they survey. That's an even more delicate subject matter than which political party would you vote for. So I sort of, okay, Purnima, let me go to you on this. Do you have any reason to dispute that the young people who said, no, I don't look for porn and I'm not surveying for it online, do we really believe them?
I would. I think that these surveys are conducted or completed under the understanding that they're sharing responses that are going to be kept confidential. So I think that, and I would trust that Media Smarts has done their due diligence in terms of explaining the methodology to the young people. I wouldn't have any reason to dispute what young people are saying. I do, though, would emphasize that this is, again, it's increased exposure means increased opportunity to stumble upon something like this. What we also know is that if you have adults who are involved and supervising young people's use of media, that is actually related to a decrease in stumbling upon these kinds of images and disturbing sorts of content online. So, again, your children and what they're sort of up to online. If you know what they're up to online, it's more likely that they're not going to stumble upon something like this.
Well, listen, my hunch is that most parents don't know what their kids are doing online, which is, why we're trying to do a bit of a deep dive on this here. And Kara, I'll follow up with this. A third of the teens said they saw pornography inadvertently online without looking for it. How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, primarily, from what they've told us, it's on popping up on the websites that they're visiting, in search engines, and a very small, about 24% of youth said it, was sent to them by friends. And I just think it's really important to keep this in mind because, for a young person to go to a trusted adult in their life, whether it's a parent or guardian or anybody else, and say, this is on my screen, I don't know what to do about it, it's very uncomfortable for them. And so we do need to keep that in mind, that it's more likely that this has popped up, that they've accidentally stumbled upon it because of a poor use of search terms, as opposed to actively seeking it out. And to Purnima's point, all the more reason why adults and parents, guardians, we need to be prepared and ready to both help our young people navigate these spaces and, figure out the tools that are available to them to help mitigate this, but also to be ready and open and willing to have these conversations at as young an age as possible, to prepare them for the inevitability that if they're online, as Purnima said, there is a likelihood that they are going to encounter this content. And we need to, again, have an open conversation about that, so youth feel they have trusted networks of support to turn to. We did hear in this study that the number one recourse for young people when they come across content that makes them uncomfortable is to go to their parents and guardians and talk about it.
In which case, Purnima, let's get some advice on this, particularly if young people as young as 9 are either already looking for this or are inadvertently, bumping into it on the internet. If parents want to be proactive, how do you begin to introduce this subject to talk to your kids about it?
Yeah, I think, the Canadian Pediatric Society has created a helpful kind of set of what they call 4 M's. So their advice to parents and caregivers is to, first of all, help to manage the use. So again, increased exposure means increased likelihood that young people are going to come across these kinds of things. So manage the amount of use of social media that your children are engaging in, and shape those rules as a family. So young people are much more likely to follow the rules if they feel like they've had an opportunity to influence those as well. So examples could include keeping the door open when you're using your screen as a child, or using them in common spaces. I think as parents, talking to your kids about what sites you should and shouldn't be visiting, I think being open about that is really important. The second M is about making it meaningful. So using technology, not just for surfing and for, watching TikTok videos and so on, but using it in positive ways. So looking up recipes as a family and engaging in shared activities and using technology to help facilitate that. The third M is around modeling moderation. So, as an adult, you really can't ask your kids to follow rules that you yourself don't follow. And so, as a family, no devices at meal times, no devices during family times, no devices. This is a big one. No devices in the bedroom overnight, because that's when young people are much more likely to be drawn to looking at their phone. So keep it someplace neutral where your young person isn't going to get at it in the middle of the night. And also encouraging play and screen-free time. And finally, just monitoring. So continuing to monitor and implement those rules in an ongoing kind of way. So it's not sufficient just to create the rules. You do have to be following up and keeping those lines of communication open with the young people in your life.
And Kara, I presume taking the approach of woe betide you if I ever catch you surfing porn is not the way to go.
No, and I just love Purnima brought up the 4 M's. Media Smarts was working with the Canadian Pediatric Society on those. So those are exactly like we would, of course, emphasize that approach. And precisely, not necessarily the way to go. Again, I think having open lines of communication are critically important for young people to feel that they have the network of support they need in their lives. We hear consistently from young people in our work, they want to know that, the adults in their lives have their backs, but that they're not hovering over their shoulders.
Having said that, Purnima, I know enough young people, I've had a few live in my home with me, to know that look, they're devious. They're going to do whatever they can to sneak around behind their parents' back and, take a look at screens in off hours when they're not supposed to, and all of that kind of stuff. How far should we be prepared to go to sort of enforce these kinds of rules, which we know are in their long-range best interests, but which perhaps they don't know in the short run are in their long-range best interests?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this depends on the family, the way that the family operates. So these kinds of issues are not independent of, they sort of go along with the way that we handle as families all other issues, right? And so I think consequences for actions. I think a non-judgmental approach to managing your child's behavior, working to problem solve together. Those are all ways that you can try and help respond when and if they do break those rules. I think another sort of thing, I can speak as a parent. One of the things that we've done in our house is we have passwords listed somewhere in the house so that anybody can sort of access somebody's cell phone if necessary. And we don't do that regularly. We don't sort of try and review and surveil our kids' activities necessarily, but we could. And even just having that in the back of your child's mind to say, my parents might actually see this, that can be a big deterrent. And so I think that, establishing rules in your family, establishing ways of being in your family that are positive, strengths oriented. And, again, you're right, Steve, kids will break those rules sometimes, but it's about how you approach those circumstances and try and ensure that they don't happen again. And I think engaging young people in developing those rules is really an important first step.
Kara, last 30 seconds to you on establishing and enforcing those household rules.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Purnima has said. Organically created as a family, including the young people in that family, in the creation and establishment of those rules and holding each other accountable. That's what we've heard time and time again has been the best recipe for success. So, it also means, as Purnima has said, that, us as adults, as parents, I'll hold myself to that as well. We need to be held to the same standards that we expect of the young people in our lives.
Terrific. Kara Brisson-Boyven from Media Smarts and Purnima Sundar from the Knowledge Institute on Children and Youth and Mental Health and Addictions. It's good of both of you to join us here on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe it's fewer presents or fewer holiday outings or a scaled-back family dinner. When tough economic times strike during holidays or any time really, it can be hard to let young people know what's happening in a way that informs them rather than, freaks them out. How can you do that? Let's ask Gary Rabior. He's president of the Canadian Foundation for Economic Education, and we're delighted to have you here in our studio.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Shall we put some numbers on the record here just before we start? We call this Grinched by Inflation. Okay, Sheldon, let's bring the stats up here. Holiday spending intentions are down 19% compared to last year. That according to a Yahoo Canada and Maru public opinion survey that was released earlier this month. 30% of Canadians said they would be spending less this holiday season. When asked why, more than 50% said inflation has caused them to cut back on spending. 33% said inflation has made gifts too expensive. And 22% said they are financially drained due to inflation and higher interest rates. So, this is going to be a leaner Christmas for most families, I guess, yes?
Certainly the economic circumstances would dictate that for people. Although I always caution people, when you hear about the rate of inflation, remember that that's across a broad range of products. Mm-hmm. You can always make your own decisions to avoid higher prices, make trade-offs, buy less expensive items and do more comparison shopping and things like that. So I just try to say to people, you've got your own rate of inflation. Just remember that. You do have some control in that respect.
No, it's a great point. At what age do you think it's a good idea to start talking to kids about personal finances, financial awareness, economic issues, that kind of thing?
It's interesting. Often when I'm asked what is the most important thing to teach kids about money, I often surprise people with my answer, and that is it's something that can start very early, around the age of 3 and 4. And that is, I believe that the best thing you can do, and I advise this to parents, is to develop a sense of self-efficacy in your child, and that is their confidence that they can set a goal and achieve it. And you can do that with a kid starting at a very, let's see what we can do to get that item or whatever, or take this trip, and involve them in the decision about the trade-offs you make. Hey, remember we're doing this, so we're going to give up that to get this. And if they get instilled within themselves that they can see a goal and they feel they can achieve it, in life and all their financial planning, they will set goals, they'll trade off, they'll get a budget, they'll follow what their expenses are. If you can instill that kind of attitude within a young person, and that can be from a very early age, it serves them very well throughout their financial management throughout the rest of their lives.
If you haven't done that, and the holiday season is upon us, and let's say they were hoping for that new bicycle over Christmas, and it's not going to come this year because they're too expensive or whatever, how do you sit down and have that conversation with them?
I think it's the kind of conversation that parents shouldn't fear. I mean, often they are fearful about the kind of conversations they have with kids. But our experience with kids, and we do a lot of work with youth, is they're very open to the realities of what economic and financial circumstances are. And I think the best thing to do is start to talk to kids at a young age, develop a relationship with your child that you can comfortably talk about financial matters, because it's so much better at that early age when decisions are not so consequential, that later on when they get into talking about mortgages and buying cars and whatever, they'll feel comfortable with you as a parent to be able to have those kind of financial discussions. So in these kind of economic times, I think it's very important to be honest with kids. You know, tell them about the fact, don't talk about inflation, but you know, prices are going up and we have to make more decisions. And it lends itself to that very important discussion that parents should always have with their kids, and that's why you can't always have everything you want. You know, and we always say the second most important thing I advise in talking with kids about money is that every decision you make entails a trade-off. Giving up something today or in the future. And if you can alert kids and get them conscious of the fact that when we do this, remember, you're giving up that or you're giving up that, and considering that in the decisions they make. And so I think that way you could talk even in inflationary times. Prices are going up. It's forcing us to make decisions even about the food we buy and things like that, and bring them into the discussion. Don't make it fearful. Don't be afraid of letting them know what's going on and why decisions are being made the way they are. It'll empower them to make better decisions later on in their own lives, I think.
You did say a few minutes ago 3 or 4, right? Age 3 or 4.
Yes.
What can you tell a 3-year-old about economics that will actually resonate?
Well, it's interesting because I think the first thing you can do is to start to talk about trade-offs. That is one of the most important financial considerations you have to make. And even at 3 and 4 and 5, kids can start to think about, I want this. Well, no, remember, you're wanting this, and if you want that, oh, okay, right. And then they feel rewarded at the end by having made those kind of trade-offs. So it's not telling about the finances and whatever like that. It's the behavioral stuff. And I think you would probably get every parent to agree that behavior development is a lot easier than behavior modification. So if you're wanting to instill certain attitudes towards money and behaviors, starting at those young ages and building them in as you go is a heck of a lot easier than when you get to high school and it's already there and instilled and you're trying to change those attitudes. It's much more difficult than at those earlier ages.
For sure. What age is a good age to start a kid on an allowance, and how much should it be?
Great question, and the one the parents always ask, and it's the one I always tell them, it's a very personal matter. There's no prescription, and I never prescribe to a parent what your relationship is going to be like with your child. Parents have different objectives. They come from different cultural backgrounds. There's different things that affect attitudes towards money. And, you know, there's a ton of research and articles that parents can read about and make their own decision. Are you going to provide an allowance for kids to handle some of their own expenses? Are you going to reward kids? Are you going to take money away from kids when they do something wrong? Is it work ethic, or is it just here's money and, you know, let's watch how you manage your own money? All sorts of different things that you can do with an allowance with a child, but it's a very personal decision that I think parents, there's a ton of stuff out there, easy to get, read about it, and make your decision about what you think is best for your own child.
Is there a sweet age at which it's a good idea to start, as in they'll start to at least understand that if you do something, you get rewarded in return?
I think as soon as they start to get into making their personal decisions about where their money is going, and it's, you know, often around the just before early teens when they can start to actually be involved in making decisions about money is when you can start an allowance going. And again, you can make that decision. Look, you have certain expenses at school related to this. We're going to give you an allowance to cover that, and you know, and maybe a little bit more. And if you want to cover those expenses wisely and then have something to save or use for something else like a video game or whatever over time, you can manage all that in the relationship with your child. And I would say that around that 11, 12, 13 is good. But that, again, is my suggestion. What I do with my kids, somebody might think differently.
Well, okay, let me follow up on that, because in that scenario you just gave, you're offering the kid money for expenses related to school or whatever else, with the notion that whatever they don't spend on that, or if they're frugal there, they'll have something left over for themselves. But I didn't hear as part of that equation, and in return, you got to make up your bed, you got to mow the lawn, you've got to, I mean, under that scenario, I didn't hear that they had to do anything in order to get that allowance.
And that's, again, a decision that parents have to make. It is going to be related to chores you have to do. And if you don't do your chores, you don't get the full amount. But it's like, you know, if you're here at work and you don't do something, they take away part of your pay, you know. Because they didn't make their bed that day, are you really going to take some of their allowance away, or are you just going to use that as a learning experience along the way? Hey, you know, you've got a responsibility here, and you're teaching responsibility about using your money. But there's so many little intricacies about managing that money relationship with your child. It's why I don't get prescriptive with parents, because there's so many factors that come into what you're trying to do with your child. And kids are also different. You know, I mean, heck, I got 3, and they're all different, and how I probably dealt with them in terms of managing money and making financial decisions varied with each child, because there's differences between a middle child and a first child and a second, you know, just in their whole behavior. And so you often have to modify your financial relationship with your child based on the kind of relationship you have with that child.
Okay, I'm curious now. Did you force your kids to do chores in order to get their allowances?
I did not. I didn't make it related to work at the time. I took it as a form of responsibility. My whole thing was manage your finances responsibly, and I watched the kind of decisions that they made. But I didn't make it as a reward thing for doing work. I made it as a responsible decision-making in terms of money that we give to you.
Did that work out?
I think they're all doing very well, and they're quite all successful. So I'm not going to necessarily attribute it to me, but maybe it's more to them in what they did. I guess the other thing to share, just in terms of parents, is don't be afraid of letting your kids at those earlier stages make mistakes, because those are often the best learning experiences. And better to make those mistakes young when the consequences are not so great. You know, I mean, I know my son wanted this elaborate driving machine at one point, and we eventually got it. I think he used it once, you know, and he was then aware of the trade-offs we made along the way to get that for about 1 or 2 days of play. And so let them make mistakes when they're not so consequential as they will be later on in life.
And when you saw him make that purchase, you probably knew this was going to be a dumb purchase, but you didn't intervene?
You got it. I really.
You let him make the mistake.
I knew. I mean, just from the way this child played with things and what his interests were, I knew this one, but it was what he was insistent upon. And I thought this is a great experience. It wasn't all that expensive, so that was good. And, you know, it was one of those things you just pretended you drive on. And so no, I think that was a good learning experience. And if I think back about it now, I'm not sure we had another incident like that along the way.
So lesson learned inexpensively.
Yes.
So it was good for
rather
everybody.
Than expensively later on, you know. When
Are you, I don't mean to get overly personal here, but are your kids prudent in their spending now, do you think, because of the way they were raised?
That would be, can I assume some of the responsibility for their good financial behavior now? And I'm going to say yes, because we always talked openly with our kids about financial matters, and they always felt very comfortable talking to us about that. And that is, I think, one of the most important things for parents to do, is make sure you have that dialogue open, because you don't want to have an awkward discussion with your kid when they're about to buy a car and they don't know anything about managing their money along the way.
Here's a question about how much you should or should not tell your kids. If one of the parents, let's say, has just lost their job, is it appropriate to tell, well, you tell me, children of what age, sorry, dad's lost his job, we don't have any money this year, and therefore many fewer presents? Should you say that to kids of 8 or 9 years old?
I'm going to throw it back again, that it's the parents' call with their kids and what they think their kids are able to accept. I'm very much an advocate for being open and honest with your kids and involving the kids in financial decisions as you feel comfortable, because they can learn from your own experience. And many parents say to me, who am I to teach my kids? I've made so many mistakes along the way. And we say to them, that makes you the best teacher, because you can help your kid not make those mistakes. But I think if you don't have the dialogue, and we don't advocate sitting your kid at the dining room table and say, today we're going to learn about this. We have a program called Talk with Our Kids About Money, and it has all things about a book you can read, a TV show you can watch, a trip you can make, a craft you can take, that involve a natural experience that lends itself to talking about money. Not a directed thing, you're going to learn about this today, but because of this experience, or did you notice this in this movie about that? And it triggers the opportunity to have that dialogue with your children. And use those to start that relationship at a young age that will build and mature over time.
Is there anything you wouldn't tell them?
I guess one could obviously say that's a personal decision, but I mean, most of the time, and that's one of the things parents fear about is that kids are going to start asking personal and uncomfortable questions. In all of my experience, I've never, when parents have found kids that's what they're interested in. Most kids are not, as much as what you might fear. They don't really, they're thinking about their own lives, and until a certain point, it's always focused on this, and the discussion very seldom, how much do you make, Dad? It just doesn't go there. And so it's a fear that parents, I think, have that quite often is not realized. And then if you do get hit with the question, what's your relationship with your child? Do you want to put it in relative terms, to other people? Do you want to be specific? Help them. Most kids know very, very little about jobs and what they pay. And that's one of the unfortunate things is that they make career decisions knowing very little information about what I should be doing to be able to get a job to sustain me going forward. The more you can, maybe not about yourself, but to help them learn about what different jobs pay and what it takes to get a certain job. Teachers and guidance counselors can't remotely keep up with the changes that are going on in the workplace. And there's so many skills that are evolving and so many skills that are disappearing that employers want. Parents have got to play some kind of role in helping kids understand what's changing out there so that you don't go ahead and waste 4 years, at university coming out and then having to do another 2 or 3 years at college. One of the retiring presidents of one of the colleges said when he retired, 42% of the college kids had university degrees. It's because how do I make a good choice? And they're looking along the way. And parents can get involved and help give them that kind of information.
What's your attitude on this? I'm sorry to say this, but there's a lot of spoiled kids out there. And their parents may want to inculcate in them the spirit of the season, which is to be charitable. Let's get down there and go work at a food bank for a day, or let's go and make a donation to a child's charity. It doesn't always have to be a gift for you. How do you handle the kid who's not open to that message?
My experience has been there are very, very few kids that would fall into that category. We find in the work we do, for example, we do a lot of work on entrepreneurship education, and we start with the young kids about what's an opportunity? What would you like to do out there? Where can we make a difference? Invariably, it's how do we feed the hungry? How do we help the homeless? Whatever. Kids, by and large, are very benevolent and compassionate in terms of what their things are. So you will find maybe some of those kids. I think it would be rare. And in fact, when we talk about what you can do with your money, we talk about spending it, saving it, investing it, and donating it. And right away and all the way along, let kids give away part of what it is. Newfoundland is probably at least lowest level of income in Canada, but they're the most giving of all the provinces. You can give no matter what you're doing when you want to help other people. And if you can instill in your child too that sense of compassion, that yes, you're doing well, or maybe you're struggling too, but there's other people struggling that you can maybe help someone, and instill that kind of attitude in. I think by and large, most kids love that. They really want to be involved and help other people, and I think you'll see it in your kids' eyes when you do that.
That is a great and timely message. That's Gary Rabiar, President, Canadian Foundation for Economic Education. Gary, best of the season to you, and thanks for
sir.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us here on TVO tonight.
Happy to be here.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, December 13th, 2022. How exactly does law enforcement solve cold cases using family trees and DNA gathered from distant relatives? We'll learn about that tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.